Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursaleen nabiyyina Muhammadi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een amma ba'du. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Apologies for being a couple of minutes late, but as I suggested previously, because of the fact that the iftar time is pushing at past 6 now here in Bradford. So by the time you make iftar, you pray Maghrib, Salah, and then you catch up with everything else. The time goes on. Anyway, enough of the excuses. But we will be changing the times, inshallah, for next week, for Monday. We'll make the announcement on Sunday for the times to change. But for now, it'll be around sort of, 45, 46, 47, inshallah. Okay. Anyway, that said, let's make a start. We are on Counsel, third counsel, the third piece of advice that Imam Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala is giving to his student, which for the early stages, I will remind you, because we're already in the fourth session. The first session was a muqaddamah, was introduction. And because it's the fourth session, it helps to remind ourselves that the person who he's addressing is a student, but is a senior person, meaning is somebody who's possibly in his 40s, and also somebody who has spent a significant amount of time learning deen. So he addresses him as we're now getting used to this famous address of Ayyuh al-Walad. He says, Ayyuh al-Walad, an-nasihatu sahlatun. He says, giving advice is easy. Okay? Giving advice is one of the most easiest things you can do. It reminds me when people say, oh, Mufsab, I've got a quick question. Asking a quick question or asking a question quickly is one of the easiest things you can do. It is the response which is where the headache comes in. It's the response which requires more time. It's the response which where the time issue is. So similarly, giving advice, Imam Ghazali tells a student who's asked him to give him something comprehensive, something that he can use for the remaining years of his life before he passes away. So in response to that, Imam Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala says that an-nasiha sahla, yani giving advice is easy. So what's the difficult part? وَالْمُشْكِلُ قَبُولُهَا. The difficulty is accepting advice. So this doesn't make sense, does it? When you think about it, you think advice is usually given to you by somebody who's more senior. Unfortunately, nowadays, anybody gives advice, even when it's not asked for. But in the good old days, advice was given by somebody who's more experienced than you, who's more knowledgeable than you, who is in a better position than you in what you're experiencing right now, and they give you their advice. So if this is a good thing, and if this is a useful thing, then what prevents us from taking it? Why does it become mushkil, as Imam Ghazali says? He'll explain. So he says, لِأَنَّهَا, so li comes for explanation. He says, لِأَنَّهَا فِي مَذَاقِ مُتَّبِئِ الْهَوَى مُرَّةٌ. Because it is for the person who persists in following his whims and desires, it is a very bitter taste. It's uncomfortable. It's not palatable. So if somebody gives you good, if you want to work out, okay, am I a person who follows my shahwat, or am I a person who doesn't follow my shahwat? The simple litmus test for you is that if somebody gives you advice, somebody who's more experienced than you, or more knowledgeable than you, or maybe older than you, and is giving you genuine advice in the circumstances you find yourself, and you find that unpalatable, you find it, why do I need to listen to this guy, right? Then that's a telltale sign that you may be one who follows your desires. As Imam Ghazali says, he says the reason why to accept advice is mushkil, لِأَنَّهَا فِي مَزَاكِ مُتَّبِئِ الْهَوَى مُرَّةٌ, because this leaves a bitter taste for that person who follows his desires and his whims. إِذِ الْمَنَاهِ مَحْبُوبَةٌ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ. Why? Because this advice is preventing him or enjoining upon him to abandon, or telling him to refrain from doing things which are very beloved to him in his heart. Meaning he's been told to abandon things which he likes to do. Okay, you tell a brother, you should go for Hajj. There's an immediate response to that. Or what do you know? Why do I need to go for Hajj for? Don't you know the burdens I have on my place? There's a problem here. This person likes to follow his shahwat. So rather than hearing out what this person has to say and taking it on his chin and thinking, actually, what this person is saying it for my benefit. He's asking me to complete a pillar of Islam. That's not a bad thing he's asking me to do. And yes, you might have certain circumstances, but there's no need to lash out to this chap. Okay, all you have to do is think about it. So it says the reason why is, one is it leaves a bitter taste, and secondly, it is preventing this person from doing things which he finds very desirable in his heart. وعلى الخصوص لمن كان طالب العلم رسمية ومشتغلا في فضل النفس ومناقب الدنيا. And this is even more so, okay, this is even more so, yeah, وعلى الخصوص, yani especially to that person, liman kana, to that person who is a seeker of knowledge. But he mentions rasmi, right? So rasmi can mean sort of conventional knowledge. Rasam, as we know, is the knowledge of the here and the now type of thing. It can be something which is sort of cultural. Sometimes we can refer to it in that way. But it can also mean superficial, that person who just spends time seeking knowledge, وَمُشْتَغِلًا فِي فَضْلِ النَّفْسِ, and he is preoccupied with kind of glorifying himself, yeah, glorifying himself, وَمَنَاقِبِ الدُّنْيَا, and trying to attain worldly objectives and worldly targets, even though he might be doing it under the guise of deen, but he's trying to seek worldly positions. فإنه يحسب أن العلم المجرد له سيكون نجاته وخلاصه فيه وأنه مستغن عن العمل, because his view is, he thinks that seeking knowledge alone is sufficient for him as a najat. Najat means salvation, yani he's met life's objectives. وخلاصه, and also that he will be free from anything else. Yani he's met life's objective, he's met the goal of life, and as a result he is going to be free. وأنه مستغن عن العمل, and he is free from action. And this is an unfortunate thing that happens to people who do seek knowledge. They suddenly stop becoming the recipient of knowledge or the recipient of the order, and they become the people who are now proclaiming the order. It's a subtle change which happens. So when you're seeking knowledge, you're seeking it to improve yourself, to better yourself, and you start applying it to yourself as soon as you learn something. But there comes a stage in your life, okay, usually when a person becomes an alim, or a certain stage in a person's life, where suddenly he stops looking at as though the address in the Quran is to him. He stops looking at as to whether the address in the hadith is to him, but rather he starts to instead turn and he starts addressing the people and forgets that the Quran is also addressing him, forgets that the hadith is also addressing him. And as he is proclaiming the message, and as he is now spreading the message, he forgets that the message is also applying to him. Now, whether he forgets or whether, unfortunately, in this kind of state of being in a position where now he has the ilm, this gets to his head a little bit, okay, and he forgets about himself. His arrogance gets the better of him. He thinks himself that I'm not, subtly, he might not even realize it. Subconsciously, he forgets that the message is also addressed to him. And in a way, then he just feels that as long as I'm sharing my ilm, as long as I'm pursuing ilm, then that should suffice. Now, remember, he may not do this consciously. He may not sit down and kind of conclude this, applying reasoning. This might be something that he comes to without even realizing it. So let's just go over those few lines again. وَعَلَى الْخُصُوصِ, this is specifically applies, a person who doesn't take advice himself, is for that طالب العلم al-rasmi, مشتغلا في فضل نفس, who is preoccupied in glorifying himself. You find that, unfortunately, even those who pursue the deen, those who go, into academic studies, go study at a university, following their becoming graduates of ilmiya, wanting to push themselves and just get preoccupied in studying for the sake of studying. and trying to achieve statuses and trying to achieve aim in that way. فإنه يحسب, for indeed he thinks that العلم المجرد, that knowledge alone is sufficient for him as a savior, sufficient for him as salvation, his objective of life, and he considers himself free from action. وهذا الاعتقاد الفلاسفة, and this is the aqidah, this is the philosophy of the philosophers. This is the position of the philosophers. This is what the philosophers believe, that we should just spend our time philosophizing, discussing, debating, trying to understand the intricacies of the universe, trying to unpack things which are way beyond our intellect, spending hours and hours and hours over it, and then spending hardly any time reciting the Quran, spending hardly any time in praying nawafil, spending hardly any time in the zahir amal of the deen, and just too busy debate. And you see that, don't you? Even on tullab, yani those who are students of the Sharia, debating on WhatsApp groups. And unfortunately, we've seen it, come onto other formats of social media for the sake of debate. This is the aqidah of the philosophers. Subhanallah al-Azim. Glory be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Azim, the Almighty. لا يعلم هذا المغرور أنه حين حصل العلم إذا لم يعلم به تكون الحجة عليه آكدا. And he says, لا يعلم هذا المغرور, and this deceived individual, meaning this student of knowledge who is seeking knowledge for the sake of knowledge without actually practice, that this is this deceited, confused, fooled individual, that he does not know that when he has learned ilm, إذا لم يعلم به, that when he does not act upon it, تكون الحجة, then this becomes an even firmer and stronger evidence and proof against him. Meaning that he doesn't realize that when he has gone and learned knowledge, this knowledge will actually be used against him. Okay, this will be used against him. كما قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, like the manner in which the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, may the praise and salutations of Allah be upon him, he narrates, أشد الناس عذابا يوم القيامة عالم لا ينفعه الله بعلمه, that the person who will be most severely punished on the day of judgment is the scholar who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not give him opportunity for him to benefit from his own knowledge. أشد الناس عذابا. So this is not the zani, this is not the sarik, this is not the thief, the qatil, the murderer. This is not, it's not that. We're not getting those big sins, the kadhab, those big sins that we consider to be absolutely deadly sins. This is a person who are being punished in this way. The way the Prophet ﷺ said that ashaddu nasi adhaban yawm al-qiyamati, the most severely punished person on the day of judgment is a scholar, la yanfa'uhu Allahu bi ilmihi, when he did not act according to his knowledge, meaning his knowledge did not benefit him. So he did the first step, he went and strove to learn, but unfortunately his niyyah was wrong. Either his niyyah was wrong from the outset, or he got so engrossed in this ilm and the ego boost he got from it, and the status he got as a result of it, and the respect he got as a result of it, that he forgot what his purpose was in the first place. That why was I learning this ilm for? Was I learning this ilm for respect? Was I learning this ilm for status? Was I learning this ilm for this? What was I learning this ilm for? He loses his way. He forgets his purpose. He gets confused. Or unfortunately, it could be somebody who actually used the deen from the outset. This is one way I can become famous. This is one way that I can have a following on YouTube. This is one way I can do this, or whatever his maqsad was. وروي أن الجنيد, and it has been mentioned with regards to al-Junayd al-Baghdadi, قدس الله سره, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sanctify his secret. روي في المنام بعد موته, he was seen in a dream by somebody after he had passed away. فَقِيلَ لَهُ, it was asked of him, مَا الْخَبْرُ يَا أَبَا الْقَاسِمِ, what's the news from the other side, O Abu al-Qasim? Meaning, you've passed away, you know what is going on now in the next world, in the barzakh. Tell us what's the news. Give us a little bit of insider information. Tell us what's going on. What should we be doing? What shouldn't we be doing? Tell us something. قال, he replied, طاحت تلك العبارات وفنيت تلك الإشارات. He says that these statements that I made were far, were mistaken, were away from the truth. وفنيت تلك الإشارات, and these indications have come to nothing. يعني فاني, ختم, destroyed. وما نفعنا, and nothing benefited us. إلا ركيعات ركعناها في جوف الليل, except the few small rakats that we performed in the middle of the night. So this is a great scholar, Imam Junaid al-Baghdadi. He's a very great scholar. I ask you to research into him yourself. And when he was asked this question, of course it's a dream, so we take it with a pinch of salt. But when he was asked this in his dream, that what has benefited you? You are now on the other side. You've now seen the result of your efforts. You spend your whole life in the path of deen. You've studied, you've learned, you've taught. You've done everything that is expected from a highly reputable, highly respected scholar. What has benefited you when you died? So we could expect any type of answer, or the teaching I did, the leadership I showed, the number of students I got, the books that I wrote, all these statements you could have made. In fact, he said they were way off. They never got me anything. The only thing which benefited us, he said, was rukai'at. Rukai'at is ism tasghir, yani it's not even raka'at. It's small. Those small rak'ats we performed in the middle of the night. So he mentions an amal. He mentions an amal. He doesn't mention any of his ilm. He doesn't mention any of his teaching, tadris. He doesn't mention any of his nasiha. He doesn't mention any of his counseling or his advice or whatever, or his tarbiyah. He mentions something which every single one of us can do, you and I. We don't need to be some highly regarded scholar. We don't need to be some famous scholar that there's only a handful. This is that any single person can achieve. And he said that is what's benefited me, performing. And why Jawful Layl? Jawful Layl is usually at the time when nobody can see you, middle of the night. Okay, and also he mentions rukai'at. Why? Small rakats, meaning there's more sincerity in that. Because when a person performs a long rakah, recites a juz in the first rakah, recites a juz in the second rakah, and he finishes, there's a little bit of fakhr in his heart. Alhamdulillah, look what I just performed. Alhamdulillah, Allah's going to accept that and he's going to give me this ajr. So there's some fakhr in it. There's a bit of riyah in it. But when someone does, quick 2 rakats, kul a'udhu bil falak, kul a'udhu bin nas, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, doesn't really think too much in them that I've done a really big thing. I've just prayed 2 rakats, will kul a'udhu bil falak in the first rakat and kul a'udhu bin nas in the second rakat. Okay, in the middle of the night, nobody's seen me. So he's got no fakhr for the eyes of the people, and he's got no fakhr in his own amal towards Allah. So this becomes very sincere. And he says, this is the thing which has benefited me. It is this act which actually I have succeeded. Forget all the books, forget all the teaching, forget all the nasiha, forget everything else. This has benefited me. So in short, the nasiha that we have today and we understand today is seeking ilm has a purpose. We do not seek ilm for the sake of it. It is not the means. So it's not the end, rather, it's the means to the end. Seeking knowledge is to benefit you. So learn. That doesn't mean that we should say, oh, let's stop learning. Learn, because you only know that you're doing your rakat properly if you know how to perform wudu, if you know how to perform salah. So you need some ilm there. You cannot just say, oh, I'm just going to wing it when I perform wudu. I'm just going to guess how to do wudu. I'm just going to guess how to pray salah. You can't guess. You need to know what nullifies wudu. You need to know what nullifies the salah. You need to know what's the faraid of salah. You need to know the wajibat. So there's some ilm required. But once that ilm, and we don't need to become an expert. We don't need to study books and books and books and books for that. That can be learned quite quickly. Then we need to put that knowledge into action. Okay, no, with sincerity. And that's it. Because when a person gathers ilm and ilm and ilm and doesn't act according to it, or worse still, acts contrary to it, then we are reminded of the hadith which Imam Ghazali quotes, in which he says, Ashaddu nathi adhaban yawm al-qiyamati alimun la yanfa'uhu Allahu bi'ilmihi. A very stern warning that the most severely punished people on the day of judgment is the learned person, the scholar, whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not allow to benefit from his knowledge. So that's a stark warning for any one of us, wherever we are in our learning. May Allah protect us from that knowledge which does not benefit. Ameen. Wa akhiru da'wana. And alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.